The Israeli military carries out strikes in and around Tehran as Iran's foreign minister travels to Geneva for crucial talks with his European counterparts. Iran fires more missiles at southern Israel as the conflict enters a second week.
Trump says he's out of patience, but he still insists that he has not made a final decision on whether U.S. troops will be attacking Iran. Moments ago, Trump wrapped up a meeting with his security team in the Situation Room. And we have new video into CNN tonight showing an Iranian missile flying over Jerusalem. The pace of that barrage has changed. We are learning that a third U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Ford, will now be making its way toward the conflict between Israel and Iran, what is clearly already an air war. The Ford is the newest, largest, and most advanced U.S. aircraft carrier. Trump saying tonight he hasn't yet decided how involved the U.S. will become in this war.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is due to arrive in Geneva to meet his counterparts from the UK, France and Germany, known as the E3. The meeting's to discuss the conflict between Iran and Israel as it moves into its second week. It's the first major diplomatic effort on the issue since hostilities began with Israel's first attacks. Well, ahead of the talks, the Iranian foreign minister told Iranian state TV that Tehran has refused U.S. diplomatic approaches since the missile strikes began.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war, things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other. War is very bad. There was no reason for this to be a war.
در شرایط حاضر و در شرایطی که
At the present time, while the Zionist entity's aggression against us continues, we don't wish to engage in dialogue with any party. The United States wants dialogue and has sent several serious messages in this regard, and we've frankly emphasized to them that it's impossible to talk about negotiations while the aggression and assault against our country continues. We're engaged in legitimate defense of our country, and this defense won't stop. There's no dialogue with Washington, which is considered a partner in these crimes. Some countries have contacted us, made proposals and sought mediation, but we've had no contact or communication with Washington, and we'll not engage with them under the current circumstances. Washington asked us to negotiate. We refused.
Said there's no reason for this to be a war, but Trump made it clear today to Iran that when it comes to the U.S. involvement, time is of the essence.
Mr. President, have you given the Iranians an ultimatum?
You could say so. Huh? They know what's happening. Maybe you could call it the ultimate ultimatum, right?
But Iran today sent this letter to the UN, 3 pages. An Iranian source shared it with me. It says that there is undeniable evidence of direct United States involvement in the war against Iran. Those are the words they use. And the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, seemingly unfazed by Trump's ultimatum. Instead, he issued this threat to Trump.
America's involvement in this matter will be 100% at their loss. The loss they receive will probably be much more than the damage Iran will bear.
Well, they are hoping to achieve, Rob, some sort of a diplomatic headway. I think they consider the fact that Abbas Araghchi is willing to come here to Geneva a very positive step, even though, as we just heard, he did say that Iran can't or won't negotiate while they're still under fire from Israel. However, there is hope by these European nations and their foreign ministers of UK, France and Germany that they could potentially do something today that could stop the escalation of this conflict from widening into the region and make the situation even worse than it is today. Of course, there are major caveats. One thing, that's quite important is that the Americans are not at the table here today on Friday in Geneva. However, the UK Foreign Minister David Lammy, who will be at the talks today, did meet with Marco Rubio, his US counterpart, the US Secretary of State, on Thursday in Washington. He also met with Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's Middle East envoy. So it is thought that he will be bringing the messages and the views from Washington to the talks here today. Now, we do know that the US and Iran have held multiple rounds of nuclear talks in the last few months. They did not make a lot of headway. There was an impasse over how much Iran could be allowed to enrich uranium. The US side was saying, well, they can't enrich any uranium whatsoever on their own soil. The Iranians were saying that was not acceptable to them. The Americans also wanted to include Iran's ballistic program as part of these talks, and the Iranian side saying, well, that's a completely separate thing. We should not be talking about that. So there were quite significant differences. Now, it is not thought that either of the sides had changed their position significantly. So it is quite doubtful. It does hang in the balance how much progress can actually be made here today on Friday in Geneva.
Israel says at least 65 people were injured in the latest round of Iranian strikes across the country. Among the buildings hit on the seventh day of the conflict was a hospital in the southern city of Beersheba. Israel says it's targeted Iran's Natanz nuclear site and has also hit an inactive reactor. Iran state media has released this video said to be of missiles being launched towards Israel. Well, the news agency says the pictures were shot yesterday. Among those injured in Israel include a man in his 80s and two women in their 70s who are said to be in serious conditions.
President Trump has called on Iran for unconditional surrender. In a flurry of posts on his social media this afternoon, Donald Trump called Iran's supreme leader an easy target, but said that the US was not going to kill him, at least not yet. US fighter jets are understood to be on their way to the Middle East as speculation grows that the US could become directly involved in the war between Israel and Iran.
Several missiles managed to penetrate Israel's defense system. This is Ramat Gan in the Tel Aviv area. A missile also landed between buildings in Holon. Well, the emergency services say more than 30 people were injured in the attack on the Soroka hospital in Beersheba. In a tweet, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said terrorist tyrants had launched missiles at the hospital and at a civilian population. He said Israel would exact the full price from Iran for the attack. Well, Iran says it was targeting a military site next to the hospital, not the hospital itself. Well, let's hear from a paramedic who was at the scene.
As you can see behind me, I am on the scene where a missile struck right in the center of a building complex. We have 5 buildings that were hit by the missile.
Well, this is Tel Aviv tonight. Iran has fired more missiles into Israel, but there are no reports so far of any impacts. As millions flee Tehran today, we will ask if the US is about to get involved in the war and whether the regime in Iran could be about to fall. But first, here's Tom Bateman with the latest from Washington.
Donald Trump's nighttime dash back to Washington unleashed more uncertainty on a region at war and a frenzy of questions asked at 40,000 feet. First, what about French President Macron's remark about an Israel-Iran ceasefire plan?
Look at it better than ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're looking for better than a ceasefire.
The president then turned to an ultimatum for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, saying he was an easy target. We're not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now, he posted. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin.
the long-simmering tension between Israel and Iran has escalated significantly into open conflict. This is a direct military confrontation that began with Israel's Operation Rising Lion attacks on June 13, 2025. Israel's stated objectives are to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons and to degrade its military leadership and capabilities. These strikes have targeted Iranian military installations, nuclear facilities, senior military officials, and even nuclear scientists. Iran has retaliated with its own barrages of ballistic missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. In one highly publicized incident this week, an Iranian missile struck a hospital in southern Israel, causing injuries and significant damage, and other missiles hit residential buildings near Tel Aviv. One notable event that was indeed caught on live TV involved an Israeli strike on the headquarters of Iran's state media. This caused a news presenter to flee mid-broadcast, and a large plume of smoke was seen rising over Tehran. Israeli military sources confirmed this attack, stating it targeted the quote, Iranian regime's communication center that serves Iran's armed forces. High-intensity cross-border strikes, the intensity of these strikes has been substantial. Israel has been carrying out extensive air attacks and special operations, aiming to decapitate Iran's military leadership and strike multiple nuclear installations. They have targeted heavy water reactors, surface-to-surface missile production sites, combat equipment facilities, and centrifuge manufacturing locations. Israel claims to have killed several top military officials and nuclear scientists in these initial strikes. In response, Iran has launched hundreds of missiles and drones, with some reportedly penetrating Israel's air defense systems, causing fires and structural damage. There are reports of Iranian Fatah hypersonic missiles being used. The attacks have mainly focused on areas around major Israeli cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa. The role of the United States. The United States has a long-standing commitment to Israel's security, and this plays a crucial role in the current conflict. While the U.S. has consistently reaffirmed this commitment through military aid, intelligence sharing, and the presence of U.S. military equipment in Israel, its direct involvement in the current hostilities is still being weighed. President Trump has stated he will make a decision on whether the U.S. will join the conflict within the next 2 weeks. There are reports that the U.S. is preparing for the possibility of a strike on Iran, indicating that Washington is considering direct military intervention. However, Iranian officials have explicitly warned the U.S. against involvement, stating that Tehran would have no choice but to retaliate if the U.S. joins Israel in attacking Iran. The U.S. has previously intercepted Iranian projectiles outside of Israeli airspace, demonstrating its support for Israel's defense. The ongoing debate revolves around whether the U.S. will move from defensive support to offensive military action alongside Israel against Iran. Diplomatic actions and chances of a ceasefire. International bodies and various nations are actively engaged in diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the conflict. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged an immediate ceasefire and called for restraint and diplomacy, warning against any additional military interventions. European diplomats are also holding talks with Iranian officials. Russia and China have criticized Israel's attacks and urged de-escalation, with Russian President Vladimir Putin even offering to mediate an end to the conflict. The UK has also emphasized de-escalation, urging both Israel and Iran to step back and show restraint. The chances of an immediate ceasefire appear challenging given the current intensity of the conflict and the stated objectives of both sides. Israel views Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat, and Iran is retaliating for direct attacks on its territory and personnel. However, the international community's unified call for de-escalation and the initiation of diplomatic channels offer a glimmer of hope for a negotiated solution. Chances of a global conflict. The risk of this conflict escalating into a broader regional or even global conflict is a significant concern. The direct targeting of Iranian nuclear facilities by Israel raises fears of nuclear proliferation and instability. One major factor is the potential for the U.S. to directly join the conflict. If the U.S. were to engage militarily, especially in strikes against deeply buried Iranian nuclear facilities, it could provoke a more severe response from Tehran, potentially leading to attacks on American assets in the region, or even an attempt to block the Strait of Hormuz, critical global oil transit choke point. While Iran's axis of resistance, proxy groups like Hezbollah, has been significantly weakened, there's always a risk of these groups becoming more actively involved, further expanding the conflict. However, some analysts suggest that Israel's actions have weakened Iran's regional network, and that Iran is facing this confrontation with a degree of strategic loneliness. For now, the focus remains on preventing the conflict from drawing in other major powers and becoming a full-blown regional war that could have devastating global economic and humanitarian consequences. However, the stakes are incredibly high, and the situation remains extremely volatile. These are the 10 takeaways from the Israel-Iran situation, based on the current developments. 1. Global oil market volatility. The conflict has immediately sent shockwaves through the global oil market. We're seeing significant spikes in oil prices, with Brent crude increasing by 7% right after Israel's initial attacks. This is largely because Iran is a major oil producer, and any disruption, especially concerning the critical Strait of Hormuz, directly impacts global supply and pricing. This volatility will continue as long as the tensions remain high. 2. Regional instability versus stability. This conflict marks a dangerous shift from proxy skirmishes to direct state-on-state confrontation between Israel and Iran. It profoundly impacts regional stability, potentially drawing in other players, even though some Iranian proxy networks appear weakened right now. The dynamic has fundamentally changed, creating a new, highly uncertain security landscape in the Middle East. 3. The U.S. and its role/involvement. The United States finds itself in a precarious position. While it has traditionally provided extensive diplomatic, financial, and defensive military support to Israel, the question of direct offensive military involvement against Iran is now on the table. President Trump has stated he will decide within 2 weeks whether the U.S. will join the conflict, which would be a significant departure from past U.S.-Israel operational precedents and carry immense risks. 4. International law and ethics. The legality and ethics of Israel's initial strikes are a significant point of contention under international law. Israel claims preemptive self-defense due to Iran's nuclear program, but international law, particularly Article 51 of the UN Charter, generally permits self-defense only after an armed attack has occurred. This creates a heated debate and raises concerns about potentially setting a dangerous precedent for future international conflicts. 5. Diplomatic polarization. The conflict is further polarizing international diplomacy. While some nations align firmly with either side, others are desperately pushing for de-escalation and a ceasefire. We see the UN Secretary General, European diplomats, and even Russia and China urging restraint, highlighting the deep divisions and challenges in achieving a unified global response. 6. Nuclear weapon proliferation risk. One of the most alarming takeaways is the heightened risk of nuclear proliferation. Israel's stated objective is to neutralize Iran's nuclear weapon program, and its strikes have directly targeted Iranian nuclear facilities. This raises critical questions about Iran's response, its potential acceleration towards a nuclear weapon, and the broader implications for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, especially given Israel's own undeclared nuclear arsenal. 7. Supply chain breakdown in technology and key commodities. Beyond oil, the conflict poses a significant threat to global supply chains for various commodities and technology. A prolonged or escalated conflict, especially if it impacts critical shipping lanes like the Strait of Hormuz, could lead to widespread disruptions, increased freight costs, and challenges in sourcing essential goods, impacting economies far beyond the immediate region. 8. Cyber warfare escalation. This conflict is also playing out fiercely in cyberspace. Both Israel and Iran are advanced cyber powers, and we've seen an immediate escalation of digital attacks. Pro-Israel groups have claimed responsibility for attacks on Iranian banks, while Iranian-linked actors have targeted Israeli systems. This dimension of the conflict adds another layer of complexity and risk, with potential for widespread disruption of critical infrastructure. 9. Global G7 pressure. The international community, particularly major economic powers like the G7 nations, is exerting significant pressure to contain the conflict. Their focus is on urging de-escalation and seeking diplomatic resolutions. The concern is not just regional stability, but also the potential for severe global economic fallout and humanitarian crises if the conflict broadens. 10. Precedent for open state-on-state conflict. This direct, overt military confrontation between two sovereign states, especially in a region as volatile as the Middle East, sets a concerning precedent. It moves beyond traditional proxy warfare and shadow operations, demonstrating a willingness by both sides to engage directly, which could inspire or normalize similar actions in other geopolitical hotspots around the world. It fundamentally alters the rules of engagement in the region.